A Brief History of St Andrew's, Winterborne Tomson. Winterborne Tomson lies in the heart of Dorset, some 8 miles southwest of Blandford. It is a small hamlet consisting of a farm, the manor house, a church, and a few cottages close by the North Winterborne River or chalk stream, which, as the name suggests, runs in winter and usually dries up in summer. Tomson is derived from Thomas, a long-forgotten lord of the manor, and the Old English word tun for estate. It's good agricultural land and has been occupied for several thousand years with evidence of Bronze and Iron Age settlements in close proximity. The earliest mention in records is in 942 AD, when the Saxon king Edmund made a grant of 8 hides of land, that is 961 acres, to Winfled. She was a formidable and rich Anglo-Saxon noblewoman and was the first British woman to leave a written will. It's a fascinating testament to life in 10th century England. Details of her estates in southwest England, her clothes, jewellery and her slaves are all given. It's believed she was a vowess, in that she took religious vows but was not actually a nun, although she had strong connections with the royal nunnery at Shaftesbury. Her daughter was Saint Elgiva of Shaftesbury, who married King Edmund I, and she was grandmother to 2 more Saxon kings. The first stone building was probably the church. St Andrew's is one of only 4 English single-celled Norman churches with an apse at the east end. Its plan has not altered since its building in the early 20th century. Even the buttresses are Norman, with the exception of a small Norman one on the southwest of the church. The windows are 16th century. There are no windows at all on the north wall. The entrance is via a square-headed 18th century west door. There was a Norman doorway on the north side, but this has been blocked. It's therefore only the fabric of this church that is Norman. It evolved sensibly and with restraint over the centuries to leave a church that has architectural integrity, rustic functionality, and simple beauty. In short, a little gem. The turn of the 16th-15th centuries saw the first phase of rebuilding. The church acquired a wagon roof, such as a common in nearby Devon and Cornwall. Timber ribs were added, and these even curve around the apse. Decorative bosses, now rather the worse for wear, were placed at the rib intersections. Please note the Tudor rose on some of them. The roof was also raised by a couple of feet, thereby explaining why the surviving Norman window seems so low in proportion to the height of the church. A window, now blocked, was also inserted into the north wall. The octagonal font does date from this period. The plain, rectangular Tudor-style windows were added probably during the 17th century. The superb and wonderfully sympathetic oak fittings were added during the early 18th century at the expense of William Wake, then Archbishop of Canterbury, who enjoyed preaching here and whose family owned the manor, even though his family home was in Shapwick. In true English fashion, the box pews increase in size from the back to the front of the church, ensuring that the appropriate social rankings could be observed. The pulpit is also this period and has a sounding board above it. The rood screen, which would have become redundant at the Reformation, was recycled to make the West Gallery, and you can imagine the church orchestra playing here prior to the introduction of organs. Tomson is a tiny hamlet, and its character owes much to the lack of wealth available to improve it down the centuries. And of course our old friends and arch improvers, the Victorians, passed it by. That meant, however, that by the 1920s it was in a parlour state and had not been used for worship since 1896. The Society for the Preservation of Old Buildings decided in 1929 to do something about it. The church was supposedly a favourite of Thomas Hardy's, even though it doesn't feature in any of his books. Hardy himself had been a member, and so the Society raised £1,000 by the sale of a collection of his manuscripts that were in its possession. Over half of the proceeds were used at Winterborne Tomson. The renovation was carried out by Albert Reginald Powys, a member of the famous literary family. He was buried here in 1930, and there's a commemoration stone on the south wall. The church's Conservation Trust took over the church in 1974, and other major repairs, particularly to the roof, have been carried out since. We usually have 2 services a year and a concert in May. Simon Jenkins recently ranked the church as one of the most significant and lovely in Dorset in his well-respected England's 1,000 Best Churches. He wrote, "In an earlier age it would have been another chapel converted to a barn. To us it's a precious relic. Structure is Norman single cell, most unusual in retaining an intact apse. The interior is bare apart from its furnishings, but these are a delight. They are of bleached oak and include beautifully crafted box pews." Candida Lycett Green featured it in her book Unwrecked England as one of her 100 gems that are mostly off the beaten track. She records the time she took Prince Charles here in 1987. He wrote, "There were so many magical views and memorable jewels of houses, but none could ever compare with that exquisite church. I shall always remember the cool, pristine prayerfulness of that unearthly place. It was total perfection and worth driving hours just to be there." Arthur Pickard Cambridge wrote about it also in a memoir of his father, the Reverend Octavius, who was the eccentric rector in late Victorian times at adjoining Bloxworth. Of my father's other parish, Winterborne Tomson, it consisted of a handful of people living in a few cottages clustered around a decayed little church in a field 2 miles from Bloxworth. My father took a service there every Sunday for his tiny congregation. For about 30 years my father walked over Sunday after Sunday in all weathers, sometimes returning drenched to the skin, sometimes with his beard bristling with long icicles, sometimes almost done up with the midday heat. He calculated he'd covered about 7,000 miles in coming and going between Bloxworth and Tomson. Thank you for listening to this history.